Aloha everyone, this is Elena. How are you guys doing? Today's lecture is on the geography of Southeast Asia, a brief or a crash course on Southeast Asian history, colonialism, and decolonization. So this lecture will give you a better context of the region that you're learning about. Okay, first of all, let's talk about the geography. So there are two geographic regions in Southeast Asia. Mainland Southeast Asia, it's it comprises of Cambodia, Laos, Burma or Myanmar, it's also called Myanmar, Thailand, Vietnam, and Peninsular Malaysia. It's also, with Burma, it's actually interesting to note that it really depends on who you're talking to. Burma is sometimes part of South Asia. So it's part of Southeast Asia or South Asia. And also important to notice that Malaysia is on both regions. So the other region is maritime Southeast Asia, right here, right here. Maritime Southeast Asia is Brunei, East Malaysia, East Timor, Indonesia, Philippines, and Singapore. So why Southeast Asia? What does the word mean? It's a term that's really a modern construct, and it was imposed by foreigners on Southeast Asians. I remember vaguely in graduate school that it was a term coined by the United States military to refer to the countries that are south of China and east of India. But most Southeast Asians, like myself, I don't call myself Southeast Asian. I refer to myself as Filipino, or we refer to ourselves by our ethnicities. Anyway, there are 11 countries in the region, but our histories and cultures are very, very much intertwined. We have so many cultural similarities, and you've already seen this in the book that you just read. So for instance, I'd like to share with you this picture of me and one of my best friends in graduate school. Her name is Sally. We used to live in a dorm at the East-West Center here at UH, and I was always astounded by how similar our languages and cultures were. She brought me to Indonesia in 2007, and that was the most amazing, one of the most amazing trips in my life. Indonesia is so exotic. This is us in front of Borobudur, a 9th century Mahayana Buddhist chandi or temple. So if you ever go to Indonesia, make sure to go to Borobudur. It's an amazing structure. Religion. I forgot to mention, my friendship with Sally was very important to me because where I grew up in the southern part of the Philippines, called Mindanao, there was a lot of conflict between Muslims and Christians. And that friendship with her tells everybody that we can all get along. We don't really have to fight all the time. And the conflict really stems from the different religious beliefs that are found in Asia, in Southeast Asia. So what are some of these religions? There's Theravada Buddhism, Islam, Roman Catholicism, Hinduism, and animist practices. However, the earliest population of Southeast Asia was animist. And even to this day, there is a lot of mixture between the religions that I just mentioned and also the animist practices. So before this is everybody practiced animism, and this was before Hinduism and Buddhism arrived in Southeast Asia, and these religions were exported from the Indian subcontinent. Islam arrived mostly through Indian Muslims and Arab merchants and later dominated much of the archipelago around the 13th century. Christianity came much later, and this was during the European colonization that started around the 16th century. So there are some photographs here that I'm sharing with you from my trip to Indonesia. And the one on the right is me with my favorite Hindu goddess, Durga. And she's awesome because she can transform herself into a fierce layer of demons or a sexy seductress. She's really cool. The one in the middle is a photo of Chandi Prabanan, a Hindu temple, and my friend Sally, who prays 5 times a day. Colonization of Southeast Asia. To understand the culture and the countries of Southeast Asia, so it's important to know about colonization. first of all, what does it mean? Well, let's talk about colonialism first, and or imperialism. So it is the policy or practice of acquiring full or partial political control over another country, occupying it with settlers, and exploiting the native population as well as their natural resources. All of the current states of Southeast Asia were colonies, with the exception of Thailand. And even then, even Thailand had its contemporary borders defined by colonial powers, and it was in large part economically colonized by Britain. Anyway, in terms of Southeast Asian history, it means that various European countries conquered or took control of territories in Southeast Asia, and this was against the native people's will. So a lot of people rebelled against the colonizers. It resulted in a lot of bloody battles as they defended their land. You will see an example of this in the Bali video that you will watch later in class. So why did Europeans come to Southeast Asia? They came starting in the 16th century because of spices, and the lure of trade. The region is a very, very important source of spices, and this is just one of the reasons why the European explorers were attracted to this area. Well, missionaries also tagged along, and they hoped to spread Christianity. But actually, the Christian missionaries helped in the colonization process. So those who didn't die in battle were forced to convert into Christianity. This was a strategy to win the local people's hearts and minds. So it was similar. If you know about Hawaiian history, it's actually similar to when the missionaries came to Hawaii. So this process was really debilitating to the native cultures because their identity and histories were gradually destroyed. So during the colonization period, states of the region became important assets to the British, the Dutch, and the French. So British Malaya, for instance, was the largest producer of tin and rubber in the world, while the Dutch Indies was the source of the Dutch's wealth. So this explains whenever you go to Europe and you see all these countries that they're so wealthy, they're so beautiful and wealthy, and part of that really, the wealth came from their colonies. So by 1913, the British occupied Burma, Malaya, and the Borneo territories. The French controlled Indochina, and Indochina is present-day Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. The Dutch ruled the Netherlands, East Indies, basically Indonesia, and Portugal held Portuguese Timor. In the Philippines, Spain took control of the country, but Filipino revolutionaries declared independence from Spain in 1898. But unfortunately, they were sold to the United States by Spain for $20 million after the Spanish-American War. Of course, a long and very bloody battle ensued because the Filipinos were really mad about this. Anyway, the Filipinos lost, and the country became the first colony of the first overseas colony of the United States. So colonial rule had a profound effect on Southeast Asia. The colonial powers profited much from the region's vast resources and large market. Colonial rule also introduced commercial agriculture, mining, and an export-based economy. And this explains why a lot of goods in the United States and all over the world come from a lot of these countries. It also increased labor demand in the colonies, and so a lot of people from India or British India and China were brought to Southeast Asia to work in the fields. So if you go to Southeast Asia, there's also a big population of Indians and Chinese. The institutions for a modern nation state, like state bureaucracy or how the government run in the colonies, are very much similar to the governments of their previous colonizers. Courts of law are similar, print media, and also modern education. And this was the biggest one, modern education. For a lot of us, education is very, very important. But the question now is that what type of education are you giving the people? By this time, the traditional practices were practically eradicated. For instance, in the Philippines, the biggest strategy that the United States used on the Filipinos was institute the American Western education. So what does this mean? It meant that growing up, I did not learn all about my history. I learned about American history. So that's a little bit messed up. I mean, I had to go to graduate school to learn about my own history. So, but what it also did, there's also something good that happened with that. The modern education also inspired the Filipinos to start their national movements, and it happened in all over Southeast Asia. So the nationalist movements grew and often clashed with the colonial authorities when they demanded for self-determination and their freedom. So by the Second World War, the region was again invaded by a different foreign power, and this was the Japanese Imperial Army. Thailand was the only country to maintain a nominal independence by making a political and military alliance with the Empire of Japan. Again, a lot of fighting here. And when Japan took over the region, the local people fought back and fought against Japan. And during the Second World War, Japan lost to the United States, and they left the regions. But by this time, when the European colonizers came back to these countries, their previous colonies, it was a very different Southeast Asia. The war has rejuvenated the nationalist movements of different countries, and the people were fighting harder and more successfully for their freedom and national liberation from the foreign colonizers. So by 1945, Indonesia fought a bloody war against the returning Dutch, and they declared their independence. The Philippines were granted independence in 1946. Burma secured their independence from Britain in 1948. The French were driven out of Indochina in 1954. And in the 60s, the nationalist movement also included the US Vietnam War, in which the US lost. So there were a lot of bloody battles that happened, so that the different countries in Southeast Asia were able to regain their independence. So, what what is modern Southeast Asia like now? Right now, a lot of the countries in Southeast Asia are also called emerging democracies. They're new countries. Many of them are experiencing high economic growth, where countries are also working closer together. So Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Singapore, and Thailand have traditionally experienced high growth and are commonly recognized as the more developed countries of the region. Vietnam too had been experiencing an economic boom. However, countries like Myanmar, Cambodia, Laos, and the newly independent East Timor are still lagging economically. And in order to increase trade and to help each other, in 1967, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, was founded by Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, and the Philippines. Cambodia was admitted into the Union in 1999. East Timor is the only one that's not part of ASEAN yet, but there are plans that are underway for eventual membership. So what is their aim, their mission for the ASEAN, or the Association of Southeast Asian Nations? Their aim is to enhance cooperation among Southeast Asian communities. Also, to establish and to encourage greater trade among the members. So, problematic legacy of colonialism. I've already mentioned quite a few. It destroyed the sense of community. It introduced a Western style of thinking, and it undermined the traditional practices that emphasize living in harmony with the environment. The native population's history and identity were destroyed, and it gave rise to Western education national elites who in turn became very corrupt and oppressive to the native people. So what we have to do now is to decolonize these areas. The national movements were very successful in decolonizing or undoing colonialism politically. However, colonization or colonialism really did a very destructive, a harmful effect on the people. Um, like I mentioned earlier, I did not even learn about my own history until later, and I had to go back and relearn about our native practices. So I am actually, on a personal note, many of us Southeast Asians, such as myself, are part of the decolonization process. And we're doing this by working on the research, preservation, and revitalization of our cultures. A lot of our history and culture was lost during this period. And at the beginning of class, I talked about my passion for this work. And teaching about textiles is important because it brings indigenous or native people's voices to the forefront. And what's interesting to me is that even though our history has always been told from the perspective of the colonizers, the wealthy, and the male population, our textiles um, our textiles tells of a different story, the story of the women, the story of the people that most people that people in our countries don't usually hear about. And it also helps in just peeling off the layers of centuries of colonization and foreign imposition on our minds. So the next lecture that I will be talking about is really going back to the root of our culture, and it's on indigenous spirituality. So stay tuned while I record the next one, and thank you very much. I hope you stayed awake.